Good morning. I am Christine Velasco from Arnold Palmer Hospital in Orlando and a member of the APSA Wellness Committee. I am pleased to moderate this session on parenthood and the pediatric surgeon, an important topic facing our entire pediatric surgery community. Before I introduce our first panelist, we would like to thank Dr. Eugene Kim, originally a panelist but was unfortunately unable to travel. He is a champion on the topic of fertility and pregnancy in surgeons and an excellent example of a supportive colleague. Our first panelist is Dr. Erica Rangel. She is an acute care surgeon and intensivist at MGH and the foremost authority on surgeon fertility and pregnancy. Welcome, Dr. Rangel.
Thank you. We're going to go kind of quick because we got a lot of slides to cover and start with the mandatory disclosure slide. But since there's a couple of us talking, I thought it would be helpful for us to sort of organize this talk into 4 sections, which is the why of why we need to do anything, covering what the problems are, and then a lot of people ask, well, why don't we just change things? How come they don't go faster? And for those of us who are seeking some pragmatic solutions, just some examples of pragmatic solutions that you can bring to your institution after this talk. And so starting with the why, I think this topic has generated a lot of attention recently, which is fantastic. We've known for some time that the priorities of this generation of medical school grads is really different from the people who finished in the 1980s when lifestyle and family just weren't the most important things when you were choosing your specialty. But ever since Generation X, dual professional couples are a lot more common, and men also see parenting as a central portion of their identities, so work-family balance has really become an issue for both genders. And despite that more egalitarian split in the division of domestic roles, the childbearing parent really does have some challenges that are worthy of talking about and paying particular attention to. And because 50% of our incoming surgical workforce are now women, and because training occurs during prime childbearing years, this is an issue that is going to become very important for so many of us who are sort of leading training programs. And you know, when we can't support people who are starting families, that automatically is going to dissuade really talented women from joining our profession. We know we're going to have a surgeon deficit of 25,000 in the next decade, so it becomes important to ask if we can recruit and retain the best people to our profession. When surgical trainees do have a child, we know that the challenges are pretty significant. We know that about half of them are developing career dissatisfaction, and that manifests in 40% reconsidering whether they want to stay in their training program, 25% preferring a career different from what they had chosen that was more accommodating of pregnancy and family, and almost a third saying they would actually dissuade a female medical student against going into the profession specifically because of those challenges. And so there's kind of 2 broad categories of challenges that I'll cover quickly. One is related to obstetric health concerns, and the second is related to sort of our surrounding workplace and professional culture that feeds into that. So I'll start with challenges in maternal fetal health. And this is some work we did in 2020. She mentioned Eugene Kim was a big part of this work. And so in 2020, we surveyed surgeons nationally across 7 surgical societies and social media, asking about what their experiences with pregnancy and family building were. And then, you know, we tried to control for sociodemographic factors by comparing female surgeons with the partners of male surgeons, and we do the usual regression models. And we're looking for the outcomes of pregnancy complications and fertility, and more importantly, how does that impact downstream consequences like burnout, well-being, and career dissatisfaction. And we find that 85% of female surgeons will work until they deliver, even though 75% of them are worried about how that schedule might impact their maternal fetal health. Even among practicing surgeons, most of them are working over 60 hours a week, taking more than 4 overnight calls a month, operating more than 12 hours per week. Almost half of them have a major pregnancy complication related to placental dysfunction, and these are things like preeclampsia, placental abruption, placenta previa, IUGR, preterm labor, and oligohydramnios. When you compare female surgeons with the partners of their male colleagues, female surgeons have a 1.7 greater odds of having one of those complications. And so when you look at data from other professions, this really isn't that surprising because we know that heavy overnight work and long work hours and long operative hours, those things lead to pregnancy complications in other professions. But then when you add to that, we have all these professional culture norms like the deferment of self-care, pregnancy-related stigma in our profession, and a lot of financial pressure if you were to cut back on your schedule. What we find, if we kind of quantify that and call that low workplace support, is that that actually drives even more pregnancy complications. So the risk of pregnancy complications jumps up to 2.4-fold higher. And that has a whole host of downstream consequences that manifest in greater postpartum depression, more burnout, lower quality of life, lower likelihood that you would recommend this career to somebody that you love. And so this is some miscarriage data, and we know that 42% of female surgeons will have a miscarriage, which is a number that's double the age-matched population norm. But what really strikes me in this slide is that it shows the proportion of women that take 0 days off after they lose a baby, lose a pregnancy. So the dark blue bars represent the proportion of female surgeons who take 0 days off after their miscarriage, and if you look at that middle bar, that represents miscarriages after 10 weeks, so 10 to 20 weeks of pregnancy, a later term miscarriage. And still, over half of them will take no time off work to take care of themselves. And so, it's really clear that we have problems. It's clear that it's becoming more common. These problems are becoming more common as our demographics of our workforce change. So why aren't things changing a little bit faster? And I think a lot of us here, all as surgeons, we're a pretty assertive group of people. And so people might wonder if you need something, you should just ask for it. But it turns out that it's really hard for people who are starting a family to ask for any special accommodations when they already feel like they've broken traditional expectations and kind of not fulfilled what's expected of them. And so they tend to be really quiet and not say much. So if we're waiting for people to speak up, we have to actually realize that there's very little psychological safety for them to do so. And so other literature that describes the challenges of low psychological safety is really plentiful. So 50% of women physicians think that having a child will adversely affect their career and give people a negative perception of them. 2/3 of surgical residents feel guilty about taking any parental leave because their colleagues are going to have to cover for them. Over 3/4 of residents feel like scrubbing out of a case to pump would upset their attending. And 1/3 of physician mothers report maternal discrimination, which is based on pregnancy, where they lost out on career advancement opportunities or leadership positions, they were held to higher standards, or they were disparaged for their maternity leave or breastfeeding. And then if you dig a little bit into the obstetric and sociology literature, we know that maternal discrimination is linked to adverse pregnancy outcomes, including preterm birth, low birth weight, gestational diabetes, and cardiovascular risk. So tackling workplace culture is the second arm of the challenges we're going to talk about. It's a really critical aspect of protecting maternal fetal health, and Dr. Yaron, who is literally the world's expert on surgical training program culture, so she's going to talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Good morning. All right, so I've been studying inclusion in departments of surgery, and I work with organizational psychologists. They are the people who study the science of organizational culture. So I'm going to present that framework to you. So first, a definition. Organizational culture is the shared and fundamental beliefs, normative values, and related social practices of a workplace. And the formal policies and informal practices of that workforce both reflect and reinforce the culture there. So I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about the individual skills, beliefs, and behaviors, the hexagons in the blue, and trying to correct those things to change our culture. But this framework tells you you also need the leadership, the infrastructure and resources, the processes and systems, and the metrics and rewards. Those aspects of the organization lay the critical groundwork for the individual skills, beliefs, and behaviors. So all of those things you try to train will just be counteracted by the things in your organization if they aren't also aligned. So that said, why is there pushback? And I think the first thing to think about is burnout. So this study follows 3,300 residents longitudinally and found that burnout development was associated with later expression of implicit and explicit biases. There's actually a dose response between depersonalization, which is an aspect of burnout, and explicit bias. So I think this tells us that you can't give to others if you have nothing to give. And so we have to think about asking people to do one more thing. Of course, that creates resentment. And we should just hold space for that as well. The second piece is defensiveness. So as part of my other work on inclusion, we interviewed 19 vice chairs of DEI around the country about barriers to the work. And many people talked about this quote. So strained relationships may be even more common now because our white male colleagues who used to feel included and empowered now sort of feel like they're under assault. We've got to figure out a way to make people feel like they're less alienated. And there's an entire body of work in organizational psychology about zero-sum mindset. So if the way that we think about pregnancy is you get this accommodation, but I have to pay for it with my call, then of course we're always going to have resentment. So that said, what else have we done so far? There's been a lot of progress in processes and systems. The ABMS and the ABS changed in the last couple of years, the parental leave policy to make leave longer for trainees as well as gender neutral. A lot of institutions have implemented lactation policies that Julie will talk about and publicly championed them. And yet, when Erica and I surveyed residents in 2021 after the ABSITE, 47% of women said they were still delaying childbearing due to residency. I remember that Erica presented these data at the American Surgical, and her discussant was Mary Klingensmith, who asked, "We have so many accommodations, why don't women take them?" And I think the answer is the other hexagons. So first, this resident's quote, "I don't feel that issue of you're a bad mom because you're working. I definitely feel the verse of that, you're a bad worker because you're a mom." And I think this speaks to the fact that we have long valued presenteeism. I myself find myself saying, this medical student is so hardcore, they've been here till the bitter end. But do we think presenteeism is the only way to value being a surgeon? And is it the only thing we should reward, right? Because that will, if that is the thing we value above all the other things, right? We're always setting people's personal life against their work. So we need to think of other things that we value and reward. However, let's say that we can't think of any, and presenteeism is the only thing that matters to us. Do we have the infrastructure and resources so that everybody can hit that target? As this faculty member says, you can't pay for a good daycare on a resident's salary. You're dependent on your partner either having a good enough job that they can pay for those things or not working at all. And so this sort of talks about the inequity, socioeconomic inequity that we might be perpetuating in our workforce. Because if you can't simultaneously pursue your dreams of being a surgeon and being a parent unless you have personal resources, right? It's not a metric that everybody can hit without further infrastructure and resources. Okay, finally, as this PD says, 40 years ago, no one cared if I spent time with my kids. The way I was a good husband was, I was gonna be a surgeon. So our trainees and our junior faculty are watching and emulating our values. So if we want them to be able to have families, we need to prioritize, we need to have them watch us prioritize them. We need to normalize that as a value. All right, so what should we do about it? So the first thing we got from our vice chairs of DEI is emphasize universality. So this first quote talks about this one vice chair of DEI, emphasizing DEI and empathy as a core competency. So it's about professionalism and integrity rather than about winners and losers or about people that need to be included and people who need to be pushed out of the way. The second quote speaks to the fact that everybody can relate to feeling excluded or minoritized, right? And it's not, again, about two populations that are set against each other, but about the fact that inclusion is for everybody. Finally, this last quote, we wanted to be careful to have representation from white males in our department so that we could have a bidirectional exchange. Again, it's about listening to all parties. And I think we need to create safe spaces for that. It's obvious that we need to create safe spaces for people to have children and be parents, but maybe the less obvious point is we also need to have a safe space for people who don't necessarily benefit from those accommodations to express that dissent, right? We can't quote unquote, correct those feelings unless we hear them. And the point that psychologists make is that we have to avoid shaming. There's a difference between guilt and shaming. Guilt is pro-social, but shaming is destructive. And if people feel shamed by the fact that they disagree, you'll never hear that dissent and you'll never be able to address it. So Loretta Ross is a DEI practitioner, a professor who studies DEI, and she has reframed it as, instead of calling people out, call them in. All right, and now I think Erica's going to talk a little bit about policies they've put in place.
Yeah, so I thought some people might like to walk away with this with some practical tools that you might use in your own institution. So I was going to give some examples of that. So I'm going to show you a couple slides about what we did at the MGH at our institution, so you can see those practical steps that we took towards both policy and cultural change. I really stole these concepts from scholars of organizational change. I'm not one of those, so this is some concepts from MIT Sloan and Wharton and HBS. And so the first step is really easy. You just have to show that what you have going on right now doesn't work. And then you want to show a quick win, right? And create a safe space for that quick win. And for us, creating a quick win was just about developing a parental support program. And so, why do it at all, right? There's this inclination to say, like, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. If you get pregnant, you just let me know and we'll work it all out. But there becomes like this institutional amnesia where we reinvent the wheel every time it's done. And that means everybody gets something that's a little bit different. And there's very little internal consistency. And we have to remember that junior faculty and residents who are the most likely to be affected are also the people that are lowest on the totem pole. So they're unlikely to ask for the things that they actually think they're going to need. And so if you have something written out in advance, it makes things really transparent. It sets those expectations. It removes the need for somebody to feel like they need to self-advocate and ask for special accommodations. Nobody wants to be special. And I think it also reduces apprehension and hostility by spelling out loud how this is going to change the lives of their peers around them and what they might get in exchange for providing support. And, I think it's worth also noting that having something like that really sets you apart as an institution. It lets your institution shine. We do know that people who have the most transparent support are the ones that are most likely to be higher ranked in their program, so you can use it as a great recruitment and retention tool. So this is what we created for the surgical residency and now for the faculty at MGH. These policies cover support during preconception and family planning, as well as providing support during early pregnancy, ensuring people get to go to those prenatal appointments. Very importantly, we try to maintain people's health and well-being while they are working, particularly in the third trimester. After 30 weeks, we put guardrails on overnight call and 24-hour shifts. Then we make sure that there's equity in parental leave, both for the birthing parents and the non-birthing parents. We talked a little bit about miscarriage, which is kind of the dirty little secret that nobody speaks about, but everybody gets 5 days off, no questions asked surrounding a miscarriage. And then support for transitioning back to work. We do try to give them a soft landing with not the hardest rotations right when they come back. And then we have like a whole appendix on people who are willing to serve as great mentors and childcare options, and we're very transparent about how much it costs for childcare in Boston, which is a lot. And then we have our lactation policies on there. And so, did it work? Well, I will say that Rome was not built in a day, so there definitely was some expected friction. Within a year after the policy went into effect, we met again, and it was pretty predictable that there were some particular people who had to do more work because of these policies and because we had 6 pregnancies in the year after this policy went into effect. So some people weren't happy, right? So we had to be very open, create that safe space for people to talk about it, why they were unhappy about it, and to make some tweaks that we felt like would kind of split the difference between the two groups so everybody felt like they were heard. And next year we're gonna tweak it again. So I think any policy that you're going to make in your department really has to get buy-in. So I think the key to doing something like this is to have surgeon-led change. Hopefully you're not letting like the union or somebody else make these changes for you guys, because it's only us that understand our responsibilities and our culture and the barriers to those things. And concurrently, you kind of have to do in parallel culture change, right? So we're working on the stigma surrounding being a parent as a young surgeon. So I think strong leadership is probably the most important thing. We're lucky enough to have a great leader who who prioritizes this stuff and, brought in grand rounds about it. We created sort of a team approach for buy-in. We made committees of residents and faculty and parents and non-parents to help develop the policies before we rolled them out. And then we've constantly circulated anonymous surveys to get feedback about what was wrong about the policy to change things. And then I'm going to pass this baton down south here. So we're going to hear a little bit more about other things we can do.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little more about lactation support in pediatric surgeons. So after overcoming the obstacles that we just discussed, surgeon mothers are now faced with the challenge of breastfeeding and an imminent return to work. Before you know it, family leave is over, and we have to think about how to feed our babies. And we know as pediatric surgeons that the WHO recommends breastfeeding for up to 1 year, and the AAP recommends breastfeeding for 2 years or longer. And when we look at the CDC data, we see that by 6 months, only 25% of babies are exclusively breastfeeding, and that's in the whole population, not just in surgeons. And so, although we recommend breastfeeding to our patients, what about our colleagues? So focusing on surgeon mothers, nearly 50% do not meet their breastfeeding goals. And these goals are personal and variable. They're likely shorter than what the WHO and AAP recommends. And there are certainly obstacles to achieving these goals. One of the challenges is finding an appropriate place to pump that's practical for a surgeon. So it should be near the operating room with a computer and a fridge, and it should not be a bathroom. This group described the resources that they established to support mothers in their anesthesiology practice. So that included an informal coaching program and a system where anesthesiologists already have breaks that are well ingrained into their culture, and so they made sure that that was a time when people could go and pump and have accessible rooms for lactation that were close to the operating room. And we know that these challenges affect trainees and attendings. Surgeons may not be aware of their rights under the Pump Act, but as we've talked about, these lactation spaces should be close to the operating room. And there are also logistic challenges. So where sometimes for trainees, you can find another resident to help cover during a long case so you can step away, it may be a little more difficult for attendings to do that in long cases. What can we do about this? Building on the work of other specialties, we believe there's an under-recognized need for lactation support. And some of the constraints are a time to pump, a physical space to pump close to the operating room, and institutional support and policies, which we've heard a little bit about. And in addition, that also it's helpful to have colleague support from all genders, and that might include things that we talked about, such as giving your partner a break during a long case so they can step out and pump. And so this support includes our partners and institutional policies, and also support from organizations such as the ACS, who just a year ago revised a statement to include recommendations for pregnancy and support for lactating surgeons, and the support of APSA to be able to talk about this today at this plenary, and also do some work on this as part of the Wellness Committee. So we have created an APSA lactation toolkit, and it's going to be housed in the APSA Wellness page. It's a document that contains tips and resources for our membership and community as pediatric surgeons. And another thing we've talked about is possible peer support as part of this initiative.
So in conclusion, we can all ask, what can I do to better support? We can recognize that well-meaning words may actually perpetuate stigma. We can advocate for each other. We can reach out to each other to help avoid burnout. And perhaps most importantly, we can lead by example. If you have a family, openly prioritize it, not just with your children, but also if you need to take care of an elderly parent or family member. Normalize making your family a priority. We are all always here for a sick child, but we also must be here for our own families as well as each other. Thank you. I think we have time for some questions.
Steve Stylianos from New Jersey. First time I said that. New Jersey. I almost hesitated getting up, but I wanted to congratulate the four of you and the program committee, of course, for bringing this to the forefront. I'm kind of living this on pins and needles. My daughter, my youngest daughter, is a second-year general surgery resident in Manhattan and also 8 months pregnant right now. So every time my phone rings, it sends a little jolt. My wife and I have our fingers crossed, and we've become knowledgeable about this literature, and you know, you worry a lot. I'm so pleased that her program director and her colleagues just simply rose to the occasion, and it seems like there's a steady state there that may work. That's my personal a little editorial or story. What I wanted to ask all of you is that surgery for 100 years has been kind of a dawn to dusk type of enterprise, sometimes dusk of the same day, sometimes dawn to dusk of the next day. We've all gone through it. That's just simply the way it was, especially for residents and junior attendings. But what if we did re-envision that dawn to dusk philosophy? What if we did, as other businesses or sectors have done, what if we really did personalize how we did things? Others have shown that you're actually more productive if you have a work model that's more suited for you. Do you guys think that if we change the work model to personalize it, we might actually get better outcomes in all of these? Thanks again.
I agree with you. Are you speaking about the 4-day work week that you implemented this meeting? I encourage everyone to go to that. I'm actually curious too.
John Waldhausen, Seattle. When I was chief at Seattle, we discussed this topic frequently. How do you all handle the friction between younger faculty who are having families and certainly need the time off to spend with them versus older faculty who also have families but whose kids might be older or even have left the home, but they still have families too? And there can be friction then between the two groups, whereas the older group is saying, wait a minute, I didn't get to spend time with my family when they were young. Now you're asking me to spend time away from my family again to cover for other people. So I'm interested in how you dealt with that.
I think that's a great question. We do emphasize that well-being and spending time with families or doing whatever passions you have outside of work are all equally important. The document that I showed you no longer says it's just for parental leave, but it's just for spending time outside of the walls of the hospital taking care of your own personal needs. So we emphasize, even if you don't have kids, that you should be allowed time off to be with the people that you love. The second thing is what I call heroic martyrdom in surgery. We all love to tell one another stories of when we went to work with the flu and we had an IV, we got 2 liters of saline and we still did rounds. And I think all of us need to stop that, right? I do it, I'm guilty of it. My husband's a surgeon, he's sitting here. And then we tell stories and tell our kids like, oh, when I went to work and I had a temp of 102. Like, our residents hear those stories and they hear that we're glorifying them and they think that's what we expect of them. So in terms of this last slide, leading by example, if you as a full professor, an associate professor, whatever leadership position you have, are open about the fact that I can't make that because I need to take my kid to soccer, that enables everybody junior to you in the room to make that same conclusion. So I think it starts from the top.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of the zero-sum thinking, right? Like, I have to sacrifice my family so you can have your family, but I think we should think about it like a positive-sum game. Like, we are a culture that supports families, you and me, and we will help each other get there, right? So the support is bidirectional.
Joe Church from Michigan, thanks for an excellent panel session. I think, Dr. Lee, you brought up this idea of the push to be ever present as a trainee, and it got me thinking too, we continue to exist in a time-based training environment. For all the talk of competency-based training, EPAs, et cetera, there are still these goalposts that have to be met, and it makes it challenging. Culture change absolutely has to be at the root of this, as you mentioned. And yet then we have these discussions saying, yes, like trying to support trainees through parental leave, et cetera, and then have these start playing this crazy game of Tetris with schedules to make sure that they also meet the time requirements of their training, and it does make it really challenging. I'm wondering for anyone on the panel, how this intersects with the discussion of different training paradigms, EPAs, competency-based training, et cetera. Is there a way to get more creative with how we train our residents and fellows while also respecting their work-life balance?
Loaded question that we don't have time to cover the details, but the EPAs are going to become an important part of people being able to take the time they need for their families and still graduate on time if they are competent to do so. So for any of the trainees in the room, if you're sort of in your junior levels, make sure you're doing those EPAs, because as we get to the end of the road, if you have a child somewhere in there, you need some time off, and you can show through your EPAs that you're ready to be done, it's possible that you wouldn't have to extend your leave. Of course, the converse is also true, but that's kind of the goal of the competency-based training, is to give us that leeway.
Do we have time for the last question? Last question?
Sorry, I'm short. Heather Hartman from Nemours in Delaware, and Liam. I'm a junior fellow there, and I just wanted to say thank you. This was a really good session. I had my second kid as a chief resident and my third as a junior fellow. And I think it's really important that we're talking about all of this, but in particular, talking about going to appointments and prioritizing our health. I had a resident when I was working on urology the other day whose wife was 20 weeks pregnant, and he was saying, oh yeah, she's having her anatomy scan on Friday. And I'm like, you're going, right? And he was like, oh no, I can't miss this. I'm like, why? There's one OR, there are 3 residents, and I'm on urology. Why are we not giving you the time to go too? So I think it's just a comment that I think it's important that we not just support the childbearing parent, but also the other parent in that very important experience of the whole birth process and making those appointments. So, thank you.
I just want to make a plug to second what you said there. I would love to see this stop becoming a female issue over the next 5 to 10 years as we talk about this, because I think there are so many in this room that actually do not carry the pregnancy, but would really love to be there for all the formative experiences in their kid's life. And I think that would advance us as a specialty much faster. Thank you, guys.